Good day, everybody. Uh, we are looking at the United Nations two goals of them, the sustainability goals and hunger and famine on this videos. The common belief that the world will be able to sustain its population in 2030 and even in 2050 is under scrutiny in this video. Already more than 227 million Africans are starving, yet Africa holds 60% of the world's arable land, and it has an abundance of water sources. We delve to the answers, look for what this problem at hand is. There's just not enough food to feed the population of the earth. This video will focus on the challenges of Africa and that it faces to establish food security. Ironically, Africa also holds the key for world food security at its abundant unused production factors. However, why then is Africa rife with famine and hunger, poor living standards, and low quality of life? Who better to have in a conference this afternoon than Professor Christo Bisschoff, specializing in marketing and in agriculture business management. He also focused on brand loyalty, business ethics, and still researches his favorite topic, agricultural business management. Good afternoon, Professor Bisschoff, and let's follow with the door in the house. The first thing that I want to know from you, the current and projected demand for food globally, the role that Africa plays, but specifically, what is the current situation in Africa regarding food security and famine?
Right. So Prof, Botha, in answer to your question, yes, it is a bit of a mystery because, as you mentioned, 60% of arable, 65% of arable land and 60% are not used. So we're just looking at Africa and look about that 5% of the arable lands being effectively used. Now, unfortunately, I've got bad news for you. Your 227 million people in sub-Saharan Africa is projected to grow up to 240 million in 2 or 3 years. And that is famine. And that is not even the whole Africa. If we look at that's just sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at the total Africa, we're talking, depending on which formula of famine you use, the United Nations and the child welfare, and these people have a bit of a different, but it's anything between 300 and 340 million people. That's the one thing. The other thing is, if we look at the population growth in Africa, it is projected to be by 2 billion by 2030, and by 2050, 2.5 billion. It's immense. The population growth is immense. So looking at that, more mouths to feed. At the moment, we're looking at 2 adults per 10,000 people, or alternatively, 4 children per 10,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa that die daily. So take that 10,000, divided by 230 million, or 220 million, 27 million at the moment, well, last year, and then multiplied by the number of deaths. It's immense. It's immense numbers of people that are dying daily. Now we think we sit here in South Africa and we're fairly protected, but I don't think we are protected. I've pulled these figures as well, and these figures state that in South Africa today, 11.6% of the population is hungry. This means more than 7 million people, 6.5, depending on the real figure in South Africa. That's not quite so certain how many people are really here. But taking the official figures of 55, 60 million, we look at 6.6 million people going hungry in our own country. And as you go north, it just gets worse. So yeah, that's the bleak picture. if you look at the statistics.
Indeed, the dark picture that you are painting there, Prof. Bisschoff, the huge population, the big growth that you are pointed out in the population. But apart from that, let's get back to the arable land. Why is it that Africa cannot feed the people on the continent despite having huge quantities of arable land to its disposal?
Well, we could split that into African influences or causes, and then also other causes that hamper our food production. So let's start first with the typical African issues. One, of course, and that's the easy one to blame, but it's unfortunately a reality. There is climate change. We see that big parts of Africa experience more in the east about a 40-year worst drought. And that alone dumped 22 million people in famine in just Kenya, Somalia, and one of their neighboring countries. Now, looking at the other side, we see that in Chad, for example, there's been severe floods. In Nigeria, there's been severe floods. Nigeria, at 29 of their states, has been significant flood damage, which hamper food production. Chad, for example, the rivers break the banks, and 19,000 cattle were just swept out to the sea. So yes, that's the first thing. There's climate change. Now, there is a number of studies that is starting to connect deforestation of jungles to this adverse climatic conditions. And therefore, there's in Brazil currently, with BRICS as well, talks of how to repatriate or re-establish woods in Amazon. But we must also do this in Africa. We must also do this in Africa. And hopefully these adverse effects of climate will then go better. The second thing, and this is probably one of our biggest issues in Africa, is the constant conflict. We have failed states like Somalia. We have many states where 3 or 4 warlords rule the country with utmost ruthlessness. And yeah, if we start going back to the stats again, we're looking at 36 million people that's been displaced. Not by the stuff we see on TV. Because what do you usually see on TV? People that escape or run from one country, crosses the border into another country. We're not talking about these. We're talking about internal conflicts between rival groups. 36 million. 36 million are displaced. That's the internal conflict. Looking at the prevalence of these events, we see that in 2016, there was a total of 3,682 conflicts across Africa. Today, 7,418. And I'll come to the effect of that now. Because as we all know closer to home, it's impossible to establish a farm at the then fertile parts of Mozambique that were run by Renama. It's just not possible. So that's the first thing. The second one is conflict. Then there's another thing, and that is changes in the first world and Europe to a very large extent. Now I'm going to get to the Russian-Ukrainian war, which is blamed for a lot which it should not be blamed for. It's an easy scapegoat, you know, like climate change. Oh, it's climate change, we can't do it. Oh, it's the Russians, that horrible Putin that did this, and now there's a lot of trouble in our country. But if we look at the needs of African countries, sub-Saharan, the need for food has increased the last 2 years by 13%. Looking at the donations coming from Europe, food donations. It has declined by 12%. So now adding those, you suddenly looking at a 25% deficit. Now we start to see the number you quoted, 227 million, and I'm talking about 240 million. This is where these figures culminate, and so on. Another one, not purely food donations and so on. If we look at human aid relief, 2018, 4 years ago, 4 years ago, Europe and the first world contributed 37% of aid relief. Today, it's 21%. So there's another down 16%. So Europe is changing. The first world is changing. And we'll see, I will still also cover governments, and we'll see that there is also a big problem there. So first of all, food are not dished out for free as it used to be. Let me say that before we get to governments. It's a standard practice of many governmental African governments to actually budget in their annual budget for free donations, for food donations. So they never consider the aspect that we are going to buy that food. And the problem of that is, as long as there is significant amounts of food and there's surpluses, everybody would be too glad to give it away. But if something like the Ukraine war happens, and suddenly wheat and other grains become scarcer, charity starts at home. So Europeans would, or any country, would first retain and fill their own baskets, and then what's left of the lesser amount could be given away. They're not going to provide the same amount of food and starve their own people. So yes, I think this is really something that government should work on. The other thing that we have, and that's the fourth reason, is that Africa is absolutely, I don't want to say the word, but they're either bankrupt or so close to bankrupt. A lot of the countries, they are highly leveraged. That's the nice word to say. They're very highly leveraged. And we see that was already pre-COVID. Now, post-COVID, that is even worse. So we just look at Sub-Saharan Africa. 19 of 35 Sub-Saharan countries cannot pay their debt. They don't have the financial means to actually buy and run the country. And that's been going on for a number of years. So we have a deficit, we borrow. We have a deficit, we borrow. We have a deficit, we borrow. And on the other side, we have food coming in for free, which we never paid for. Now we've got to start maybe paying for that. And the creditors are just saying, hey guys, you know, we should look at things like restructuring debt. You are very high risk. Debt is getting more expensive. So not a good financial picture. So that's also an issue. Now, coming back to the price of food, we see that there was an average 29%. 23. Oil was 29, 23 on average. Since, and take note of this date, since October. Not since February, when Putin attacked Ukraine. So before there was even a Russian war, with Ukraine. Stocks in the world were getting low. Now supply and demand, prices starting to get up. So if you really look at the monthly or weekly wheat price, I have it here that I could have shown you, but it's very condensed and complicated. You can't really see that nicely on the screen. But it tells you very clearly that by October, November, before Putin attacked Ukraine in February, the prices were well above 10-year average levels. When Putin attacked, it spiked over $400 for wheat. But within 3-4 months, it came down. So it's not the war. That's a common misunderstanding. It's not only the war. Yes, for 3 or 4 months, the war did create a spike. But the big issue here that we must understand is the price was starting to rise because the food stocks in the world are low. That doesn't spell good. That's not good news. And yeah, it's a bit of a long answer, but it's very important that we understand this. And then finally, we get to governments. And I came across a very interesting agreement between the Sub-Saharan Africans in countries, leaders. In 2003, they recognized that here is a looming food crisis coming. And they said to each other, every country, we must work together and we must at least spend 10% of the GDP of every country back into developing agriculture, on food issues that can improve food. That would include infrastructure, getting to markets, etc. Now, 10 years later, 20 years later, let me just take my notes here and show you. Only 2 of the 39 countries adhere to their own agreement. So they knew in 2023, here comes trouble. They worked on a plan. I can't say if it was a good or a bad plan, but they saw it and they knew something is coming. We've got to do something. Let's try. And it's only Zimbabwe and Mali that went and stayed with that. Then, of course, we've got a lot of problems with I've already spoke about that. This is one of the reasons of big projects failing, where the European countries or whatever came in, tried to put in mega production farms, increase and so on. There is just not infrastructure. We had the example here of a number of farmers that went to the Congo, very competent farmers, very knowledgeable farmers, but there's just not infrastructure. There's corruption. They could not get the fertilizer and seed from the harbor. And if they get it out, you can't get it to the arable land. So yes, governments fail to create a enabling environment for farming. And that's something we must understand well. In places where big farms were fairly successfully established, the practical situation is that who is farming there? A lot of subsistence farmers, each on his 5 or 10 or 2 hectares, and you've got to remove all these people from their heritage land. You're going to establish a 10 or a 20 or a 30,000 hectare farm and plant olive tree or whatever you do and establish plants and everything. But these people are displaced. Where do they go? And you cannot accommodate them all on the farm for employment. And then usually some of the development companies are also guilty. They promise hospitals and schools, and then they buy an ambulance in one specific case to take it to the nearest town. So they also don't play the game. So what happens? All of a sudden, now John Deere would start. If they start, they would break down. They would find all sort of stuff in the diesel. So the displaced people could even go to levels of sabotage. So it's a very politically difficult thing because the company negotiates with government. They never negotiate with the people on the ground who's being displaced. And this comes back to poor governance. Really, in my view, it's just coming to poor governance. And yes, that is basically the biggest problems. Of course, there's one, but it is so common that we all started to learn with it. And that is basically the concept of corruption that's filtered right through. And I dare to say a majority of our continents in South Africa as well. So that's the core reasons that we're looking at, and yeah, that's unfortunately not a good picture.
Yeah, now I must say, especially against the background of dwindling supply and increasing demand, that spells an absolutely perfect storm. But I'm sure the United Nations are well aware of this and some of these facts. So my next question come back to the United Nations. Can the United Nations aim to eradicate hunger in Africa by 2030 be achieved?
Well, they formally strategized this, Prof. Botha. But you know, as much as I really like to see this, it is not conducive for the continent. This continent's not in a good place. And if you can just improve this, socially, humanitarian, and all these nice issues that we would like to do and that everybody thinks we can do. I can't see that. I can't see that. I'm very sorry to tell the viewers that I can't see that. Very positive. We have the arable land. We have 60% that's not being developed. You know, it's 60% of the world's arable land. Africa has got a solution for the world. You can drive through the whole of which I did in Romania, in Poland, parts of Germany, old Czech Republic, Hungary. Every piece of land is worked and to provide food. In Africa, you drive miles and you probably see more elephants than cornfields. So looking at that, looking at the projections of population, looking at the number of conflicts. I mean, if we sit in a situation where there's 3 big groups having conflicts over a big area, we look at 7,000. You never get these people around the table, and everyone has got his own agenda. So yeah, it's very bad news. But I do believe, we have the production factors to do that. But I can't see by 2030. I can't see by 2030. Yes, and then finally, I just want to say, this is the bad news video. We're doing it in 2 parts. In the second part, we're going to try and find solutions. So yes, hopefully we'll be more positive there. But sometimes it's also good to straight look your problems in the eye and really not deny what is going on, see what's going on, and then you can make the proper decisions. I hope we can pull it through.
Prof. Bisschoff, let me thank you from my side. For our viewers, this is indeed a 2-part series that deals with famine and food security in Africa, looking at 2 goals of the United Nations, sustainability and hunger. Thank you very much, Prof. Bisschoff, for the first part. Indeed, the second part of this series, we are going to look now at what can be done to improve the world's food situation from an African viewpoint. Thank you very much, Prof. Bisschoff.
Thank you.